Similar to the Kislev people, the roster in battle is adaptable to almost any situation, with many units being able to do multiple jobs rather than totally focusing on one. This means you end up with a lot of hybrid units rather than choosing them for just a single role. You also have access to several beasts that no one else in the mortal realms has been able to tame, and I'm sure you have barely any idea what I'm talking about there. Let's first go over the pros and cons of the faction in battle. As for the pros, the roster, as I said, has a lot of hybrid units that can do a lot of work from ranged, as well as defend themselves from mild threats in melee. The 2 laws of magic alongside the battle prayers also add up to a lot of magical utility out on the battlefield, and of course they have access to a number of powerful bear units that are as efficient as they are cool to look at, and can often result in a grisly end for your foes. As for the cons, the price of all those hybrid units is that some of them end up not being great at either job, and instead end up being mediocre at both. Their early game is also particularly weak, with most of their units having a combination of no armor and no way to deal with armor, meaning as soon as the enemy has even a shred of defense, you tend to fall off a cliff. And finally, the power of bears can tend to overshadow some units and cause you to have a lack of choices when making your armies in the later game. One more thing to note before we get started: while the Kislev roster does not have battle abilities like some of the other factions, they do have one ability that is shared amongst all units containing men. By Our Blood, which grants them 30 seconds of Unbreakable when their leadership is about to break. This basically gives you a chance to make use of the units for a short while longer before they break, and to be honest has very rarely made a difference between victory and defeat, and is more of a spit in the face of your enemy, as you take a few more of their troops with you before your unit breaks and likely leaves the battlefield forever. Now let's get into the roster, starting with the Lords. First up we of course have Sarina Katerin. She's a spellcaster and decent in melee, and of course has access to Law of Ice. Now before she gets on her mounts, she is still not bad at melee combat, but lacks the armor and HP to survive against anything that isn't super basic. So you'll want to keep her safe on the backlines providing spell support, and only send her in when you know she will be safe. Her powerful Law of Ice is great for taking out groups of enemies and single entities with ease. As long as you have wins, you'll have a powerful choice for any situation. She also has a couple of abilities: Arcane Conduit for more power recharge, Guardian Call to summon a Snow Leopard, Stand Your Ground for buffing nearby units, and Ice Shard for magical missiles. Her Warhorse mount isn't really anything special, offering her the best mobility, but not a ton in terms of fighting capability. If you just want her to be a spellcaster, this would technically be the better choice due to the speed, but you'd be leaving a lot of value on the table. The Warbear isn't quite as fast as the horse, but it does boast fantastic melee boost to send her from a simple spellcaster to a powerful melee fighter that can also provide spell support for your army when it needs it. This is always my choice playing as her, as it really does make her into a jack of all trades. Next up we have Costalton. He of course has access to battle prayers, deals armor piercing damage, has frenzy, as well as flaming and magical attacks. Now he is much more of a frontlines battler than Katerin, with much better melee and damage stats alongside some actual armor. Once he gets his prayers online, he can also provide various powerful buffs to himself and his army, which make him into a great all-round frontlines battler. Of course he's the greatest fighter in the world, so once he's going against high damage and dueling specialists, you'll want to pull him out just to keep him safe. He also has a couple of abilities: Ursun's Ward, which grants HP replenishment, the Courage of Sacrifice, which buffs nearby units' defense, and Blaze of Devotion, which buffs nearby units' damage. He has the same mountain choices as Katerin, and the Warhorse is even less appealing here since he needs to be in the front lines to get value. The Warbear is the best choice yet again, as it gives him the boost he needs to take part in the late game front lines and provide that value alongside prayer support to nearby units. Our final legendary lord is Big Boris Ursus. He's armoured, deals armour piercing damage, and has a bonus versus large. And finally, we have the best frontlines battler in all the Kislev legendary lords. With his high armour, high damage, and bonus versus large, you can't really go wrong sending Boris into the front lines. There are very few enemies that can stand toe to toe with Boris and come out on top, so don't be afraid to send him in alongside his troops every single time until you find a limit. He also has a couple of abilities: Heroic Resilience, which grants defensive buffs to nearby units, Foe Seeker for more move speed and vigor replenishment, and Deadly Onslaught, which grants increased damage. His mounts, of course, only make him better in everything he does. The Warhorse is yet again only really here for speed, as nothing it offers is really worth picking up when you look at the alternative. Erskine is his unique bear mount, and it makes him into a monster in frontlines combat, with a powerful charge, massive damage, and large area of attacks that can cleave down infantry with ease, as well as shred even the toughest enemy lords. Back him up with some other warbear riders, and no one is safe. Just be wary if he invites you to any garden parties, those known to get a little bit busy. First of our non-legendary lords is the Boyar. These are of course armoured and deal anti-infantry damage. First of the non-legendary lords, and these really are your bog standard frontlines lords. They come with decent damage and survivability, with good melee stats, some decent anti-infantry damage, meaning they will make a great addition to your front lines to keep the morale of your other troops up, alongside doing some decent damage themselves. Of course, versus more specialised dueling lords, they will still struggle, as well as versus any high damage, armour piercing infantry, so just pick your targets well and you should be just fine. and they have all the same abilities as Boris. It's the same choice of mounts as Costalton and Catherine, and again the Warhorse is looking a little pointless, as there's not much use being fast when you can be almost as fast and better in almost every single way on a bear. Of course, the Warbears are the way to go here with their massive damage boost, decent speed, and powerful frontlines presence. Do the same as Boris, get with some Warbear riders, and crush the enemy frontlines with ease. And our final lords are the Ice Witches. These are of course spellcasters and can either choose the Law of Ice or the Law of Tempest. Our final lords, and we're looking at another fairly basic one. These ladies are pretty much exclusively spellcasters, as their damage and survivability leave a lot to be desired, so you want to use them just as such. Keep them safe behind your front lines and provide spell support wherever needed with either of their very powerful laws of magic. You want to avoid direct combat as much as possible, and only send them in if it's against something with low damage and armor, otherwise you're going to be doing more harm than good. They also come with a couple of abilities: Arcane Conduit, Guardian Call, and Glacial Blast for some damage all around themselves. They have the same mount choices as Boyars, and again, it's kind of hard to recommend the Warhorse. If you want them to be spellcasters and nothing more, then I suppose you can go for them. But if you want them to be spellcasters as well as melee battlers, then the bears are the only choice, and I would go for them every single time. Either way, keep them on the move, only engage alongside allies, and toss out spells whenever needed. Coming to our heroes, first up we have the Patriarch, and these of course have access to battle prayers. These function similarly to Costalton, though obviously without the same combat prowess. They will still do decently in the front lines, so long as it isn't against anything with too much armor or damage. They can provide spell support with their battle prayers in a variety of ways depending on what prayers you choose to pick up. No matter what you do, you want to keep them close or inside of your front lines as much as possible. They also come with the Courage of Sacrifice ability. Of course, they have the same mountain choices as the Lords, and once more the Warhorse is looking a little pointless unless all you care about is speed. I would again go for the Warbear every single time, as they are plenty fast and just do a ton of damage no matter where you use them. Our other heroes are the Ice Maidens. They are spellcasters and can of course choose from the Law of Ice or the Law of Tempest. These are very similar to the Ice Witch Lords, but with some slightly worse stats. They want to be used pretty much the same, but even more cautious at melee battling since they will fare even worse. Keep them safe in the back of your front lines and provide spell support wherever it is needed, and only send them into actual combat as a total last resort. And they also come with the Glacial Blast ability. They have the exact same mountain choices as Patriarchs, and the advice is pretty much the same as it always is. Warhorses are fast, so if you only want a caster, then you can go for these. Bear is still fast, but also a great fighter, so 99% of the time, I would go for these guys, unless you have absolutely no reason to get them into the front lines. Coming to the melee infantry now, first up we have the Armoured Cuirassiers. These are a tier 2 unit, and armoured and shielded, and come with a ranged weapon. These are technically a hybrid weapons unit, but since their ranged weaponry is relatively low damage and range, they are going into melee infantry. These lads are an early to mid-game frontlines unit that excel at holding the enemy back, whilst other units such as Cav, missiles and magic do the real damage and send the enemy packing. Before the lines hit, they can also make use of their ranged weapons to lose a couple of volleys and do a nice bit of burst damage, giving them the edge once the front lines clash. They are relatively tough with their armor and shields, and while their damage isn't the best in the world, they will do just fine versus earlier game units and will hold their own long enough versus any mid-game front lines and give you plenty of time to get them some support. They also come in another variation, Armoured Cuirassiers with great weapons. These are another tier 2 unit, and are armoured, drop the shields, and gain armor-piercing melee damage, and keep that special ranged weapon. These lads of course drop those shields in exchange for armor-piercing weapons. Personally, since they are a line holder infantry, I prefer to stick with the originals, but if you're looking for a more aggressive front line, then these lads might be for you, since their damage really isn't half bad. Sadly, this damage boost comes at the cost of reduced defense stats, meaning they may deal more damage while in combat, they will also take more. Combine this with their lack of shields, and they end up surprisingly squishy despite their armoured appearance. Next up we have the Sargard. These are a tier 3 unit and are armoured and shielded. These lads are your endgame front lines, and they are tough. They don't have the ranged weapons Cuirassiers have, but they are immensely tough to take out with a massive amount of armour. These are going to be your endgame walls that will hold the enemy back and allow the rest of your army to move in to take them out in a flash. Not really much else to say here, since they really are just a super tough front line. Their damage isn't the greatest, but you don't really need it to be, since at this stage of the campaign, the rest of your army should more than make up for it. And these of course come in another variation, the Sargard with great weapons. These are another tier 3 unit, and are armoured and deal armor-piercing anti-infantry damage. This variation come with more damage and a hefty chunk of armor piercing with that bonus versus infantry, making them into frontlines blenders. Of course this comes at the cost of not being quite as tough as the base units, so neither side is going to stick around on the front lines. I personally prefer to go with the base unit since their tankiness is just that good, and the difference in damage here is just not worth it. If you're into hyper aggression, then by all means, take some of these guys, but if you prefer to play it slow and want a nice meaty wall to keep the enemy out, then go with the base units. Moving on to the ranged infantry now, first up we have the Cuirassiers. These are a tier 1 hybrid unit and are weak versus armor. Now something you're going to notice more and more as we get into this roster is that most Kislev units can do it all. These guys are no different, as they have decent ranged firepower for the early game alongside decent melee stats. Not great, but decent, and more than enough to get you through those very early game battles, provided they have support and are making as much use of their range damage as they are their melee. These are going to be your early game spam units, since they are so cheap and can perform decently however you want to use them. Want to keep them on the back lines and provide missile support to your front lines to whittle down the enemies from afar? They can do that. Want to have them as your front lines and have other units come in to support them once the lines clash? They can do that too. Want to use them in both places at the same time? They can do just fine. Not really a bad way to use them is what I'm trying to get at. They also come in another variation, and that's spears. These are another tier 1 hybrid unit, and now have anti-large damage, but are still weak versus armor. Taking spears gains them some melee defense alongside anti-large damage and an expert charge defense. This makes them a little better in almost everything they do, so I like to go for this upgrade as soon as I can. Other than these very small differences, you want to use them pretty much the same, so the same advice applies as it did before. Use them pretty much anywhere, and they will do just fine early on, but you'll want to replace them pretty much as soon as you can. Next up we have Strealzy, and these are a tier 2 hybrid unit, are now armoured, deal armour piercing range damage, and are a decent melee combatant. These guys are the only ranged infantry that don't have firing arcs, meaning you need to have a direct line of sight on their targets, and when you're playing a faction like Kislev that rely on battle lines, this can be a bit of a pain, and leave them in some slightly precarious positions. I would say deploy them ahead of your front lines to get some volleys off as the enemy approaches before moving them back as the front lines clash. Then you can move them onto the flanks of the enemy lines to get some clear shots, but be very careful to keep them safe as they are not quite as effective in melee as from a range. They are still decent melee fighters and a full stack of them wouldn't be half bad, but they are still ranged units first, so will not perform as well as dedicated melee fighters, and in my opinion work better in a mixed army. No matter what you do, keep them firing as much as possible and you can't go far wrong. And next we have the Ice Guard with swords. These are a tier 3 hybrid unit and deal anti-infantry damage and have frostbite imbued attacks. These ladies are the most elite of possibly all of the Kislev troops, as their training and weaponry are so fine-tuned and elite that very few make it to where they are, and it shows. The damage from a range is brilliant for an arch unit, and combined with the frostbite attacks that slow the enemy and allow you even more volleys when they are out in the open, and you have a unit that is very scary to get targeted by. They are also of course decent in melee combat, and while they aren't as proficient as your Sargard, they will deal with most weaker flanking units quite easily, or at least last long enough for you to get them some support. Overall they are a very powerful ranged unit, and are a staple in my endgame armies for sure, and they also come in one other variation. Ice Guard with glaives are a tier 3 hybrid unit and now deal armor piercing anti-large damage and still have that frostbite. The only difference between these guys and the swords is the anti-large and armor piercing, which makes them into overall better melee fighters as long as they aren't going against chaff. I like to upgrade to these guys pretty much every time since they can do the same great range damage whilst also having some very powerful melee stats. Now come to the Cavalry and Chariots. First up we have the Costalton Dervishes, and these are a tier 1 unit. They are very fast and come with Vanguard deployment. These are very much your standard early game cav units with pretty pitiful survivability and melee stats, but they are extremely fast and pretty cheap, so they aren't half bad. Like most similar units, they want to only be used to take on enemy backlines and blitz them 2-on-1 if possible to burst them down as fast as you can. If you can sandwich them, then even better to make the most of that fairly meager charge bonus. I'd be cautious about sending them into the front lines, but if you do, just be sure to make full use of cycle charging rather than sustained melee, as they just cannot stand up to anything with even a little bit of combat prowess. Next we have Horse Archers, and these are a tier 2 unit. They are decent melee combatants, very fast, come with Vanguard deployment, and can fire whilst moving. These are more or less the Dervishes, but they trade a little bit of combat prowess for some ranged firepower, which makes them into a halfway decent early game skirmishing unit. They don't have the best damage in the world, and against armor, they're going to fall off a cliff in terms of effectiveness, but early on versus less armored clumps of enemies, they can do some decent damage and can keep themselves safe while they do it with their high speed. If they run out of ammo, then I would say to focus them exclusively on enemies already running away, as otherwise they are likely not going to come out on top with their less than brilliant fighting stats. Next we have Winged Lancers, and these are a tier 2 unit, now armoured and shielded, and come with anti-infantry damage. These are the first of the cav units that are actually pretty decent. They come with decent toughness with their armour and shields, alongside a respectable charge bonus. They don't have the best sustained melee stats in the world, so you definitely want to be using these guys to cycle charge to get the most out of them and avoid casualties as much as possible. Since they will still be the fastest units in your army, you still want to use them to get around the enemy and take out their ranged units as quickly as possible before coming back around to cycle charge their front lines and shatter their spirits before your melee infantry run out of steam. Basically, just keep them on the move and charging, and they can't go far wrong. Next we have the Griffin Legion, and these are a tier 3 unit. They are armoured and shielded, and deal anti-infantry damage. Now these are more or less the same units as Winged Lancers, but come with better stats aside from a slightly slower speed, so do all the same things, just better in almost every single way. They still want to be used in exactly the same way to get around the enemy lines and charge their backlines before coming back around to crush the front lines. Their massive charge bonus should make this even easier, whilst their huge armour and shields should keep them safe while doing so. Just don't be fooled into keeping them in sustained melee, as this is definitely not the best use case for them by far. Next we have the Light Ice Sleds, and these are tier 2 units. They are armoured and deal armour-piercing anti-infantry damage, and can use collision attacks, which I'll explain in just a moment. Now these lads are a pretty unique unit, as they are essentially ranged chariots being pulled by bears, which makes them pretty bloody hard to stop. They do a nice chunk of armour-piercing damage, both in melee and from a range, so we're not looking at a war wagon knockoff. This unit is actually good. You want to use their firing on the move to get into position and fire at the enemy flanks whilst keeping them safe from being pinned down in melee. If the enemy has ranged or weak units, you can send these guys in to charge around, but you have to follow the rule of chariots and always keep them on the move, as in sustained melee combats, they do not perform well, as their large hitboxes and poor defense mean they go down very quickly. These guys also come in another variation, the Heavy Ice Sleds, which are a tier 3 unit, are still armoured and deal armour-piercing anti-infantry damage and can use collision attacks, which basically means they can charge around like a chariot and mow enemies over. The heavy variants come with more HP, armour, melee attack and charge bonus at the cost of a small amount of speed. They're still plenty fast enough to get around and behind most enemies, but you'll just need to be a little more careful if the enemy has a lot of cav, as a small difference may allow them to catch you. Besides this, you can use them pretty much the same, but maybe lean on the charging around a little more, as the increased bonus does really add up if they are constantly weaving in and out of combat. Still, do not let them get pinned down, as they will still go down way too fast. It's a total waste of their very high potential damage. And our final cav units are the War Bear Riders. These are of course a tier 3 unit, are armoured and deal armour piercing anti-large damage. These are of course the most anticipated of all the Kislev units. To be honest with you, they 100% deliver on what you hope they would. They have the same great speed as the Griffin Legion, and trade slightly less armour, leadership and a big chunk of charge bonus for a ton of HP, weapon damage and melee attack, which makes them into the ultimate sustained combat cavalry. They are brilliant for tearing the enemy ranged infantry apart in moments before coming back to crash into the enemy front lines. Their main draw is their low maintenance, as you really can send them in versus most units and leave them there, and chances are they will do just fine. While the damage potential with well managed shock cavalry may be higher, it's just so easy to get value out of these guys that it's hard to say no. Besides, look at them, they look badass as hell. Now come to our beasts and monsters, starting with the Snow Leopard. This is a tier 2 unit, deals armor piercing anti-large damage, and is very fast. These lads are very much like single entity warhounds, but with a ton of damage. They are extremely fast and can get around most enemy front lines with ease. Their high damage allows them to tear through most backlines in an instant, and is almost a waste when it isn't being used on more armoured targets. I like to use them right in the middle of the front lines amongst my melee infantry to keep them safe as best I can. Their damage and melee stats mean they will dish out a massive amount of damage, but their low armour, HP and melee defense means they will be taking a lot of hits whilst they are there, so be cautious of letting them get pinned down by troops with a lot of damage or anti-large. Aside from this, isn't really a bad way to use them, so I'd pick up a few and send them wherever you need them. Our other monster is the Elemental Bear. This is a tier 3 unit, is armoured, deals armour piercing damage, causes terror, and is unbreakable. This absolute unit of a bear is the end game tanky monster of the Kislev ranks. It has a huge amount of HP and armour, so the enemy is going to need to totally take him out to get rid of him, and they're going to want to try very hard. It does a massive amount of damage with massive armor piercing weapon damage alongside magical and frostbite attacks, ensuring resistances are ignored and whatever he hits isn't getting away easily. It can also use his elemental breath to do a good chunk of damage from a range. Now by now you've probably realised his one major downside. He is a hecking chonker, so enemy units can focus fire him pretty bloody easily and burst him down before he can even get close. His 25% physical resist will help this somewhat, but you still want to focus down enemy ranged units if you want to keep him safe. Other than this, he is pretty tough to take down, so send him into your front lines and watch his damage numbers climb. Now final unit, and the one and only artillery, is the Little Grom. This is a tier 3 unit, is armoured and deals armour piercing damage as well as collision attacks. This one and only artillery unit of Kislev is pretty dang good. They're only single entities, so they don't have the best rate of fire or ammo usage in the world, but the shots they do send out put in a lot of work. It has a ton of armor-piercing missile damage and can take on single targets and infantry with ease with its large projectiles. I would probably lean more towards taking on single entities if you can for 2 reasons. First is the damage. It's more concentrated on a single target, and no infantry can stand up to 503 damage, so you'll be overkilling them every single time you shoot, whereas something large will take all of that damage to its very large health bar and really feel the burn in each and every single shot. Secondly is the firing arc. These lads are cannon units, so fire in more or less a straight line, and once lines clash, hitting infantry in the front lines will be difficult and risk friendly fire, whereas a large target will sit above the rest, making it for an easy target for these lads to focus down. Of course, if the enemy has no large targets, then go wild on that infantry, but if you have choice, you know what to do. Now in Warhammer 3, every unit has a tier from 1 to 3. I'm going to be using these tiers to make use some armies for the early, mid and late game, so you are set for every single step of your campaign. Starting with tier 1, our army is going to be led by an Ice Witch with the Law of Ice. Of course, we're choosing one of these ladies to lead our armies. They can get on the Warbear mount eventually and go toe-to-toe with Boyars in open combat, whilst doing a ton of great spell damage at the same time. Either of the laws are viable. I'm going with Ice because I like it a little bit more, and it's Kislev, so it's the faction of Ice. Now for the front lines and the back lines and most of the lines, we're going to go with 13 Kossar Spears. Since it's either these or regular Kossars, it's a no-brainer to go with these lads, since they do all the same things but have more defense, meaning longer line holding, and much harder to take out with Cav. And to close out, we're going to go with 6 Kosovar Dervishes. These are another unit that's only here because of a lack of choice, but they will do fine in these super early game battles until you're up against something with a little more backbone. I think this faction is strong because we're getting that magical value right off the bat, and what a law of magic it is. Yes, the Lord won't be as present in the early game battling as Boyars, but eventually they will overshadow all other options once they get spells and a mount online, so it's worth the wait. Massive amounts of ranged units will burst down most early game units before they even make contact with you, allowing you to keep your army healthy and on the move as much as possible. And finally, the Cav will be there to take out anything ranged that's trying to pick you off from a distance, as well as charging down anything that's retreating to ensure it doesn't come back. Moving on to tier 2 now, we of course still have the Ice Witch with the Law of Ice. She should have more spells online by now, and possibly a mount if you've been really good at grinding levels. Going to pick up a Patriarch, picking up one of these guys to their frontlines presence, as well as the Battle Press for even more utility. I toyed with double spellcasters with another Ice Maiden, and while it can work when you have the wins, without them you end up with 2 characters that aren't frontline specialists. Bringing these guys with their prayers really beefed up my lines and overall resulted in a more balanced army. For the front lines, we're going to go with 6 armoured Kossars, sticking with these over the great weapons for the extra defence. I want them to be a shield, not a sword, and block the enemy whilst other units move in to do the damage. Dropping down to 3 Kossar Spears and picking up 3 Strealzy for our ranged infantry. Splitting my ranged infantry between these two, so not everything requires a clear firing line to deal damage. Of course, Strealzy do great AP damage, but they need an angle, so positioning 6 of them would have been a little much micro, especially against some of the more mobile demon armies. Going to go with 4 Snow Leopards. These guns function as both frontlines monsters and backlines cavalry, as their speed allows them to get in, tear the enemy to pieces, and get out before they can react. And closing us out, we're going to pick up 2 Light War Sleds. Closing with these guys since they do such great range damage if they can be kept safe, and with an army like this, microing 2 chariots shouldn't be too tough, and besides, if you get overwhelmed, you can always stick them on skirmish. Now this composition is strong because we've got that character presence on the front and back lines alongside a combination of powerful magic and prayers that will keep the enemy under constant pressure and alleviate any on your own units. Our front lines are super tough for this stage of the game, alongside having those ranged weapons for the initial burst of damage to quickly put enemies on the back foot as they approach combat. The Leopards will provide presence all over the battlefield to take out enemy ranged units, and the Light War Sleds will provide any extra charging you need alongside that constant ranged pressure on their flanks. And finally we come to our tier 3 composition. Our Ice Witch should now be in their final form with all spells unlocked and upgraded alongside their Warbear mounts to get involved in the front lines alongside their spell support. The Patriarchs similarly should have all their prayers online and upgraded alongside bear mounts, so getting into the front lines and buffing as much as possible whilst they are there. For our endgame front line, we're of course going with 6 Sargard. These are the endgame tanky front line, and will last a very long time, allowing you to move in units to do all the damage. For the range, you're going to go with 6 Ice Guard Glaives. These are the best overall range damage, alongside having decent melee stats, so if they get caught out, they will hold their own and get back to shooting before you know it. Going to go with 2 Warbear Riders, taking these as my endgame cav units that will focus on wiping out the enemy back lines before coming back to charge into the front lines. We're also going to go with 2 Elemental Bears, purely frontlines monsters that want to use their breath abilities and then get deep into the enemy lines. And finally, going to go with 2 Little Groms. Want these guys to sit at the back and provide missile support and focus down large targets with ease and keep the rest of your army nice and safe. Now this composition is strong because you have one of the toughest front lines in the game, alongside a ton of damage in the form of your missiles, magic and monsters. This adds up to a combination where the enemy cannot get through to you and they can only watch as they are slowly broken down over the course of battles. You also have a number of options to get around the enemy lines and take out any ranged units they have, and they are put in the impossible position of choosing between giving up ground or allowing their back lines to fall. You can't really go wrong with this turtling composition. The enemy have to come to you, and it is only going to hurt more the closer they get. And that is everything you need to know about Kislev in battle. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving it a like, and of course subscribe to see more videos like this, including the Ogre Kingdom's campaign guide coming on Monday. Leave any questions you have in the comments below, and I'll answer them as best I can. I'd like to take this time to thank some supporters of the channel, like Dominic Schmass, and of course Henry Tucker, XGS, and Adam T for their support at the Unclean Ones tier. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member here on YouTube, a subscriber on Twitch, or a patron on Patreon. Doing so gets you shoutouts at the end of videos like all of these wonderful people. Huge thanks to all supporters, one final thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.